So, good morning, and thank you for attending this session. This session is about Skype and Lync and how we team up with the service provider community to serve the customers. So the goal is the customers, and we want to be able to do our best to serve you, provide you with all sorts of solutions and options. Mm-hmm. I'll kick off the presentation. My name is Amr Hassan. I'm part of the connectivity team in the big Skype. So when I say big Skype, that means Lync/Skype, and I get tired of saying that all the time. So I appreciate that you understand the context. And of course, my friend Clinton Dickey, he's my co-presenter, although in reality, he's actually going to be presenting the core of what this is all about.
We'll hope.
Just to raise his expectations. So the agenda is, what we'll do is we'll basically have a snapshot of what is the team Microsoft plus service providers can do for the customers. And it's a summary introduction that will be followed by quite a bit of details on deployment options that basically will be presented by Clinton. And then I'll come back and talk about what is the future hiding for us, what kind of innovations are we looking at right now, and what kind of innovations that we will be looking at in the future that basically provides value adds. So that's the session. Is it clear what the session is all about? I know there has been some confusion earlier on other sessions, so I just want to make sure that this is the expectation. Okay? So on that note, what we have done since Tony Bates gave his keynote last year in San Diego, basically reaching out to billions and billions of people and serve them anywhere from the boardroom to the living room. So Microsoft and service providers, at the end of the day, we have to empower billions of users out there to do what they like to do, whether it's sharing experiences or productivity. Something that we discussed quite a bit also in the last Lync conference in San Diego is the C2X, or B2X rather, and we'll talk a little bit more about this with Skype acquisition and what we have done. So we spent the last 12 months executing on what we promised. You heard yesterday in the keynote that Gurdeep gave, as well as Derek, about a dozen of things that we have included in our offering in the last 12 months. So with the services that the service provider bundles our solution with their solution, basically what we're looking at is providing end-to-end solutions for the customer and for the extended customer, if you wish. One item yesterday came up is that it's about universal communication and not about unified communication anymore. So keeping that in mind, we're going to be progressing through this presentation. So this is a 30,000 feet snapshot of Skype, service providers, and what our goals are. Our goals is to serve the customer. If we break this down to the next level of detail, we have Skype, which basically, for the most part, serves the consumer. And it's an easy, ubiquitous, unified communication application that basically right now is used by over 300 million customers. And these are repeated customers, so it doesn't count those who sign up and use it once in a blue moon. So with Skype in and Skype out, as well as, of course, Skype-to-Skype communication, we constitute very large traffic over the network or over the global network. Now, it says here that this is mostly a Microsoft offering, only if it's a standalone offering. Clearly, when you look at the B2X, this becomes a service provider and a Microsoft type of a solution. On the business side, small and medium-sized business, if you wish, what we have done is that we announced the PSTN link to phone, if you wish, or I don't know what we're calling it these days, PSTN dialing which is bundled with the service provider offering, so that when you have Office 365 Lync online, you're able to reach anybody on the PSTN network. So this was a big announcement yesterday that was announced by Gurdeep, I believe. But basically what it is, it takes the Lync online plus the Lync hosting pack that is adopted by the service provider to satisfy what customer needs. And the customer in this case, as we've talked about, is the business customer. And the PSTN dialing will be released next year in 2015. And basically it completes the offering between the enterprise and the personal spectrum. On the managed side, we have Office 365 for Exchange and SharePoint, and enterprise voice from service provider. So basically you have a total managed solution for the enterprise that's hosted by the service provider and enabled by Skype/Lync. On the Skype side of things, a lot of customers are asking about the federation between Skype and Lync. It was made very clear yesterday that video is here. You saw a demo, and the expectation is to release the federation between the video Skype Lync federation sometimes in the summer. I'm not sure if we announced a date, but anyway, it's coming this year sometimes. Now, so this is coming down from the 30,000 feet down to the 10,000 feet, and what I will do, I will hand it over to Clinton to go to basically the details of what this slide is all about. But at this point, is there any questions on the high-level part of it? Feel free to make this interactive, so even if I don't ask for input, raise your hand if I miss or we miss anything, and we'll address it the best we can. Okay? Monsieur Clinton?
I always feel like we should put Easter eggs in the slides just so you guys can capture something that we didn't talk to. So what I want to talk about, and this is really the core of the message that Amr and I want to deliver today, is to really think about the options that Lync gives you as a customer, depending on what segment you're in, depending on what features you want, what capabilities you may have in your existing infrastructure today. If you think of Microsoft through Office 365 as a service provider, as well as our partners that are also service providers, I want to talk through real quickly some of those options that you have and really think about the impact that has on your deployment schedule or your expectations for your deployment of Lync. And so when I think about the sort of these options that we have, there's really four main pillars. The first is a managed, and this is actually probably a majority of what we see in Lync today, which is it's on-prem. It's maybe managed by a partner. You might be managed by your own IT department as well. But this is going to be the functionality that you're used to. Same thing if you had Exchange or if you had SharePoint. You own your own identity, so through AD, you have the other components, and you really manage that yourself. Like I said, as we get into larger companies, a lot of times we're seeing that being farmed out to service providers to be a managed provider or through a global SI, a system integrator. But that's kind of that's where we start. We say, okay, that's where the expectation is today. What we've seen, though, is that many companies, and I hope you'll nod your head and yes and not no, is that they want to get away from that management of those systems. They want to get away from being able to have that infrastructure cost within their own data center or within their own IT department. And so the push we're seeing is, hey, I love the functionality, I even love the control, but I don't like the cost, right? I don't like the mess of having to deal with this. I'd rather have somebody take this over in a secure way, and it kind of, again, gives you that similar functionality and control. So if I go to the next leg over, I kind of go into this idea of thinking about what Microsoft has been able to offer through Office 365, which again is sort of a wrapped, defined product that we have, has feature sets that are pretty set, not a lot of flexibility or extensibility around that, but if it has a feature set that you're looking for around instant messaging and presence, there might be some interaction with how you're doing voice, it has that functioning built in, and you can kind of just sign up for it, and you get what you get. You know what you're getting. The nice piece about this is as we do more work with the service providers to look at how we add PSTN, as well as with the announcement that Amr referred to or that Gurdeep mentioned yesterday in the keynote, which is us being able to put voice into the Office 365 package as well. It just completes the overall picture. I think for us, when we think about instant messaging and presence, fantastic functionality, but it's been there a while. Voice is really the kind of the core requirement that people need to be able to drive their business. It is the world that's been there for 100 years through the traditional PSTN. And so we want to make sure that's part of the service that we're offering with Office 365. But again, it's really talking about a very static service that we offer through Office 365 today. I will say that there are obviously plans on our behalf as a service provider to look to enhance that. We want to be able to become more extensible. We want to be able to work with service providers or with ISVs or with a different partner set to be able to add functionality or do value-added services on top of that. And so that's part of the work I do. I manage a lot of our hosting architectures or our strategy that goes with that. And that's how we're thinking about partners, or how we think about service providers, is great core functionality. What else can we add on top of that? You know, what makes the better experience for users or for you guys as customers? The second one that you then pop out to is really looking at, take Microsoft out of the picture for a moment and really look at the service provider becoming a hoster. And this one's near and dear to my heart because I deal with a lot of the partners that do this today. And really this is I think, of two primary segments for this. If you think about I would consider the medium business, small's in there too, but really not as prevalent. So really thinking more around the 400, 500 users per tenant type deployment. That's where we're going to be looking at things like the Lync hosting pack, which is a multi-tenant platform, meets the right economics. Some of the challenges we have to get that small with Lync Server is that, you know, if you think about the deployment of Lync Server, being able to roll that out and offer the monitoring and archiving and the front-end servers as well as the edge servers, there's a lot of pieces there, which are great. It gives you great functionality, but the economics are hard to make work as we go down in the number of users. So Lync Hosting Back was purpose-built to be able to come out and be able to say, okay, we'll give you a multi-tenant platform, be able to target that 25 to 250 users per tenant, and be able to allow you to roll out multiple tenants on top of that platform. The other piece of that, then, the other segment that we would look at is the enterprise, and really thinking anywhere from, let's say, 500, maybe 1,000. I would say there's a sweet spot somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000, but anywhere from, let's say, 500 up to 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 ports or users. And in that case, we're really looking at the core functionality of Lync Server. And the beauty of Lync Server is the fact that it's full-featured. It's everything that we can pour into it, including the kitchen sink. So when a hoster takes that and is able to deploy that either in a single-tenant environment or in virtualized environment, you're really getting the best of what Microsoft offers through the Lync platform. And they're able to host that as a service. So again, really taking that responsibility off of the customer's back to have to be able to deploy that infrastructure, maintain it, have an administration program, IT, all those different things can actually be managed by the partner, but gives you the full functionality. And the last one is really when we think about kind of better together. When we take Microsoft and we really think through this hybrid idea of, I want to put, and one really prime example that we have today is, I want Exchange to sit in Office 365, perfectly happy to have Microsoft manage my email. Might even have voicemail attached to that or unified messaging attached to that, but I really want to have my Lync voice go with my existing carrier that I've been working with for years and I have existing contracts or whatever. Or maybe I'm trying to get rid of my PBX and they've been the service provider that's offered me a solution to do that. We think that's great, right? Because really what you're building then is a perfect solution of our strengths, which is our software and our capabilities within Lync, matched up with the strengths of a carrier or a service provider who's looking and managing those voice services. So if you look across the spectrum here, you kind of start on the left where you get kind of this kind of static, you open it and you know what you're getting kind of scenario, all the way up to the what I would consider to be the very intense hybrid solutions, which are going to be very customized, take a little bit longer to deploy, but you're getting exactly what you need for your enterprise. I apologize for my voice. It's been a love-hate battle with it all week. So as we think about those four pillars, really what I'm going to talk about, and I won't take too long on these because I think most people look at this and understand these 5 areas, but I want to talk about the rules of what we think about, or what you should think about as a customer, is if you're rolling out Lync, what are those different phases? What's it entail as far as being able to roll this out and make this happen? Whether it's within Office 365 or it's through some type of hybrid solution through a partner. So the 5 areas we have are design, provisioning, integration, deployment, and support. And really what I want you to think about is, start at the very beginning. I have an idea, right? I want to be able to deploy Lync all the way up to the part where Lync's been deployed, it's running in the network, you're getting the functionality, and you need some support on that thing. So we'll go through that whole spectrum. The design phase is actually one of the most important phases, because as you think about those 4 different ways to deploy, or 4 different services, I guess, that you can, I'm not sure it's the right way I want to phrase that, but 4 different ways you can actually deploy, whether it's through Microsoft or through the partner, you have to think about what your core requirements are. As I work with hosting partners, a lot of times the questions that they have to ask very first is, what features are important to you? If you take something that's sort of static around Lync Online, that doesn't have a lot of, say, PBX type functionality, and you as a customer really require that, it's probably not the right platform. We need to look at something else that works for you. So the design is really to think through these different things that we have. It's also a chance to be able to look at what your existing infrastructure looks like, which is actually very, very important. You can imagine if your employees are working and maybe you've even built line of business applications, or you've done other work around your existing infrastructure, and then you just rip that out and put, go somewhere else with Lync, you're not going to have, productivity is going to go down, probably the morale is going to go down, and it's probably not the right way to do it. Instead, we want to be able to come in and be intelligent about, hey, we're going to be able to take your existing infrastructure, know that piece should go away, know we're going to keep that piece, and be able to think about it from a full scope of what works today and where you want to go to tomorrow. A couple different things that we have to think about. PSTN is always interesting for us when we think about even from a PBX integration point of view, or in this case it calls out the IP PBX. We need to think about, some companies that we've worked with, they have 5-7 year contract on their PBX. They say, well, I can't get out from underneath that, but I want to be able to use the functionality of Lync. That's an important consideration for us to be able to think about, sort of maybe a roadmap, right? Maybe you're going to do instant messaging and presence today, and you leave your voice capabilities where they are. Maybe you add some voice functionalities for some of your subsidiaries or some of your departments. But as you think through, as we go through the deployment of Lync, these are the types of questions we want to ask up front, so that we can actually come back and give you the very best solution, or so that our hosting providers can give you the very best solution. There's a bunch of links in here, and I think the slides will be made available if you want to be able to go out to these different hyperlinks that are on the right-hand side. There's just some information about how we're doing these different things, or how we've written papers, white papers, TechNet articles, and stuff like that. So you'll see the links on the right side. I'll ask you just go ahead if you want to review those offline. So now we've gone through the step of saying, yep, I know what I want, or I know what my expectations are from a design point of view. Now we start thinking about provisioning. And this can actually take on 2 different facets. One is simply, hey, what kind of hardware are we going to use? What are those requirements for the hardware? What are different network capabilities? We got to do some network assessments. But there's also the facet of being able to look at it and say, how am I going to maintain this, right? If in fact you're deploying this on-prem, or if you're the service provider who's maintaining this for you as a managed service, there's some work that needs to be done to be able to interact with you and be able to live up to the design expectations that we just did, and make sure that we can provision that in the right way. There's actually some ISV or some capabilities that we build into Lync. There's different ways that we can manage that, but it's really important for us to be able to come back, and it's sort of the acknowledge from the design phase to say, this is how we're going to deploy it. Do we agree that this actually meets the needs of what you're trying to deploy? There's also a couple different capabilities that we have around. In Microsoft, we're very, if you've been around Microsoft at all, we're very meeting intensive. And so, when we look at tools to be able to do communication or collaboration, not only do we think about Lync as far as the capabilities around a Lync meeting, but things like Lync Room System or other kind of add-on pieces become critical for us. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the former product we had, which was called Roundtable. Those were actually deployed in every one of Microsoft's conference rooms. That was a consideration that we had to have, which is, hey, I got this remote user who really wants to be a part of the meeting, but they're dialing in. How can we let them see what's going on? How can we give them the capability to have video? Roundtable was a great product. LRS is actually, or Lync Room Systems, is sort of the next generation or the evolution of that, to be able to have a full meeting, and really whether you're remote, whether your butt's sitting in the seat right there in the meeting, whatever that the mix might be, you can actually involve people like you're all in one room, including web app sharing, doing other things like that. So all those are part of the provisioning aspects of being able to say, when we roll this out, here's what it's going to look like. It even gets down to the end of that process is an actual diagram of exactly what it's going to look like in your environment, but it actually hasn't been deployed yet. Integration, I talked a little bit about it, the pieces that we have to be able to do integration with. I would say the most consistent rule we have about networks is that no networks are ever the same. When we think about our platform as far as Lync functionality, I think we can be pretty consistent on what that offers. If I think about how that integrates with your existing infrastructure, how that integrates with your user base, how this integrates with your partners through federation, it's never the same. So it really needs to be a step in here to come back and say, okay, we know we've done the design, we've done the provisioning, we know what it's going to look like. Now I kind of need to think about what the ancillary pieces are for us to be able to connect to other parts of your business, other parts of your applications, line of business applications, existing hardware or infrastructure. All those pieces really come back down to this stage. And really, if you think about it from a service provider or from a system integrator, this is where their strengths are. This is where we would rely heavily on a partner to come in and be able to have that relationship and really take apart, okay, we're going to make these things work here. We need to build out functionality, or we need to build some type of widget to make that functionality work. We're going to design that all in this phase. Only got 2 more. Deployment, which is the fun part, right? So now we've done all the hard work through the design, we've done the provisioning, we understand the different integration points that we need to be able to manage. Now we're actually going through deployment. What's interesting about deployment most times is that we get 95, 96, 97% of it accurate. There's always going to be the 3, 4, 5% of it where something pops up and we say, oh, we didn't know about that, or there's a different expectation. And so what we actually look to do here is not only think about the topology mapping that we can do for, that we did back in the previous step, we actually come back and be able to take that same map and try to overlay that with the existing deployment and say, did we meet what we expected to do? Are these different connect points working? Are we getting the functionality from the PBX to Lync that we expected? It'll be interesting as we go through and I know Amar's going to talk about video interop. To me, it's going to be a really interesting thing to consider of how we work with the old VTC systems as far as when we think about deployment, right? Are you getting the functionality that you expected? But those are the things we're going to go back and do. It's really a checks and balances to come back and be able to say the design that we set out to deploy has actually been recognized. And then the last one that I put in there is really the support pieces of this. And this is really the ongoing. This is after you've actually got it deployed, you've got the functionality realized in your network, and now you're either you're managing it on-prem or you have a partner who's managing it within their network, is really to be sort of that ongoing capabilities. This would be inclusive of things like cumulative updates that Microsoft publishes for Lync. I think you heard, actually it wasn't Gurdeep, somebody else said it yesterday. As we go through these CUs, we actually add functionality. It's not just like a bug fix, although there's some of those potentially in there. It's actually sometimes we're adding functionality to the CUs. So there's going to be this sort of evolution of the product that's just going to happen, or should happen seamlessly as they roll out these different updates to your network. The other piece that I would look at is that as problems arise, you want to work with a service provider that has the capability to come back and troubleshoot those issues, whether it be that there's not enough bandwidth, maybe there's an issue of too much. If you're trying to do a conference, there's not enough performance value from the hardware choices or hardware requirements that they've implemented. Whatever that might be, there's kind of that long-term evolution. This is an important thing for you to consider because it's not something that's going to show up in those first 4 steps. It's only going to show up when you go actually out to use it, and you may run into issues. The last piece I'll say is that from a standpoint of kind of the intelligence of communications, I came out of PBX background, so when I think about capabilities that we had around CDRs and stuff like that, it's an important piece to be able to understand within your business what's happening, who's making these calls, who's using this functionality, why is it being used. That capability is all built into Lync, but you want to make sure you work with a service provider that can offer you that sort of post deployment reports to say, here's what's happening within your network. If you're actually a current managed platform or have something within your on-prem and you move to the cloud, your expectations shouldn't change at all on the type of control or type of capabilities that you have. And so that would be built into this phase, is to come back and say, once we're up and running, we're all really happy with the functionality, what's the long-term evolution of the product? I think that's all I had.
Maybe we should pause for a few minutes and see if there's any questions on any of
core part of the presentation. And any questions for Clinton on the options for deployment and the steps for services?
For me, it's probably, as we were building the slides, it's probably...
every question with
nice. I forgot to bring mine.
any question will get $10 of Skype credit. There we go.
Yeah.
Is there any more information about hosted Microsoft Enterprise Voice?
There is. So, and actually, that's what I manage within the product group. I can get with you afterwards. I'll give you my card. But what specific information are you looking for?
We're an Office 365 customer.
Okay.
We're paying for E4.
Huh?
We don't use any voice capabilities but we would like to.
Got it.
So we were here on the conference in San Diego last year.
Yep.
We've been waiting for 18 months. And then it was here with Microsoft.
So,
What was announced?
right, yeah. So the PSTN capability, I think, was announced through Gurdeep, which is built-in PSTN capability or voice capability.
Right.
2015, I think,
Right.
is the date.
It's sometimes next year.
Yeah.
We haven't.
18 months from last week.
No, I think there was the functionality. The way I've heard it best explained is that Tony Bates set a very aggressive time schedule, which is great. That's what we want from a leader. When we went back and looked at some of the functionality that we would need to provide to make that work within Lync Online, it was a little slower realization of that. At the same time, though, I will say, and it's worth talking offline, there are other providers that are providing voice capabilities that your E4 SKU can work with.
Don't I have to, if AT&T is,
As an example, yeah.
but wouldn't I have to do there's no migration path from my current Office 365 instance over to the AT&T instance. Wouldn't I have to bring all my exchange information?
No. Well, you could. I mean, if you wanted to manage everything through AT&T, as an example, and AT&T is a great partner. But whoever that might be. But what you can do, and again, it would depend on your specific requirements and what your long-term, if you want to be everything on Office 365, migration could be an important consideration. But today I have, customers can actually have Exchange sitting in Office 365, which would be the same as you have today, and have voice sitting or Lync sitting in a partner. And that's the hybrid solution that I had up on the screen there. So in that capability, you don't have to port anything. You matter if your domain stays in Office 365. We just use AT&T or whatever the partner is to be able to do the voice capabilities. And then there's integration between those 2 points. So no, your users stay within Office 365. The partner usually uses a resource forest in Active Directory to be able to map that across.
Yeah, somebody said it was syndicated partners have their own instance.
Syndication is a different strategy. Yeah, syndication and hosting are two different things. Syndication is, to exactly your point, syndication is everything. I want to be able to resell Exchange, SharePoint, Lync, whatever. I want to resell Office 365. Hosting is actually, and that's not to say that hosters don't sometimes host all those pieces, but hosting is through the E4 SKU is just the voice component. I got a question back here, and I'll come back to you.
He was asking about enterprise voice, and you answered with PSTN. So the PSTN service in Office 365
Good point.
is supposed to be the same as enterprise voice.
It's not. And we've gotten this question a couple times. So again, I think that the long-term goal around EV or enterprise voice is to be full functionality. The way I look at it is take everything we can do today in Lync Server, I want to plug that into Lync Online. The realization is that we're not... What? It's just because you're in front of the speaker. Come back this way. Either that or I stepped in front of it. The realization is that we're not going to get there in the short term. So I think the first thing, what Gurdeep was talking about, he was very precise in his words, as he always is PSTN or business voice, which is really just voice functionality. It's being able to provide DID numbers and be able to have dial-in capabilities with Lync Online. But EV is the long-term goal in being able to kind of have a full feature-rich. And the way I look at it from a Microsoft employee is I have that functionality sitting in Lync Server today. I want parity with Lync Online. That's our goal, but that's sort of a longer-term goal for us.
Can you elaborate a little more on the distinction between PSTN and enterprise voice? Will phones work? Like, you can have a phone on Skype, for example. So can you have a phone? Is it just click dial, or is it voicemail? Like, where's the line?
Well, voicemail you would have to exchange, but yeah. So it's not PBX integration. It's not PBX type functionality. It's just strictly PSTN voice. Really being able to dial in. So if you're sitting in a corporation and your Lync is sitting in Office 365, and somebody dials your area code and 7 digits, it's going to ring into your phones and be able to go through that Lync system out to whatever devices you're using. That's what I would consider to be PSTN voice. Anything beyond.
It's like the on-prem thing.
It's not like on-prem Lync voice, because there's other functionality within Lync Server that we don't have in Lync Online today. So, so the way I look at it is just simple voice is the best way I can explain it, without going into a bunch of diagrams. Which if I had a whiteboard, we could do it. But it's probably a good offline discussion about it. But really, the way I think about it is simple voice. And then when I think about full voice functionality around, call park and being able to do PBX type features around response groups and stuff like that, that's the eventual evolution that we want to get to. Same as what we have on Lync Server today. Does that help?
Yeah, and so, yeah, it does.
Okay.
You'll really get thumbs up.
Let's have a conversation after, and not because it depends on what you mean by phones. As far as there's functionality we can do today in Lync Online, as far as the extensibility there to be able to go to any SIP device, probably not at first. But we can talk about that. Yeah.
You can have like a Lync optimized phone right now and just do a Lync to Lync phone call.
Right. Right.
So you have the phone, like an actual handset.
Yep.
Yeah, they're either optimized for, I don't think they qualify for Lync devices. They're qualified.
Not for Office 365, but you can still do any Lync certified device or Lync to Lync phone call
Yep.
through Office 365.
Yep.
Optimized devices, to your point, correct.
You had a question?
Yeah, the hosted enterprise managed voice, assuming that's the right title. Now, are they usually in partners' data center? Are they dedicated, or can they also be kind of virtualized, and then they can kind of provide each for one of their customers a separate software instance, or does that include them both?
So I would always consider it to be a separate software instance. If we're talking about, if I don't take the multi-tenant platform for a moment, which is a smaller segment, virtualization is actually critical for the economics of it, to be able to roll that out and be able to have a platform that can offer your customers a decent price per user. You have to go with virtualization, but
Is that assuming that you're supporting multiple customers with it, right?
yeah.
Okay, so it's supporting.
Yeah, it's not multi-tenant. It's still single tenant, right? It's a single instance but multi-instance. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I think there's several different things we're working on with our partners. So more to come. Yeah. Okay, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so this slide basically shows that one instance of an experience that's been provided for a vertical. In this case, it's the hospital using Lync on-prem, and then the mobile workers are using Lync mobile, and then the rural clinic part of it is using Skype. And the reason we brought this up, and I wish I could share more details on the partnership, is this is one example where we have teamed up with a service provider where they integrated all these aspects of the modalities and the platforms into one offering to their customer. That's it's just a quick flag to show you that there's this, and there are many more that has happened in the last 12 months. So one thing that the difference between this Lync conference and the last one is that in the last Lync conference we talked a lot about how do you define the user's personal and business boundaries. Now, yesterday, the punchline of Gurdeep's keynote is that, okay, these boundaries are actually fuzzy. They are intertwined. And how do you actually make use of the offerings that we have available and the ones that's coming in the next release to basically fuzz these boundaries in a context-aware environment. Now, there's a lot of terminology here, but I want to set the stage on what will be coming next in the future on basically technologies and innovation that will hopefully enable some of these universal communication. One thing that Clinton touched on when post-deployment is basically how do you actually monitor the network? What kind of insight do you as a customer have on the network that either hosted by a service provider or some hybrid between something that's on your prem that you run and hosted by the service provider? This has been the toughest aspect of deploying an application or unified communication application over a network. And for this, network monitoring and diagnostics has been the very first thing that we have worked on in the past 18 months. And then we're taking this to the next step, and I'll talk a little bit about this into dynamic provisioning. So we flashed this out. There has been several sessions on SDN that are really compelling and awesome that were run by Mike Butler as well as Pascal Menez on my team. But I love this slide because it starts by showing the dinosaur era, and dinosaurs at the end of the day didn't survive because they just didn't have the right environment for them to survive. So this distributed way of controlling a network has been around for decades. The interesting thing, it took a long time for the paradigm shift from this view of networking to the software-defined networking that some of you are familiar with and I will talk about. The key problem with this is that if you want to provision your network, most of the time you have to provision the network a controller at a time. And guess what? Provisioning these controllers a node at a time, a lot of times you have to have a shell type of script that you have to run. I mean, really, in the era of software innovation, you still have numerous networks that does that kind of stuff. So instead, what we're doing, we are teaming up with our service providers, partners, customers, and so on, to move the paradigm shift into a centralized way of controlling the network. Well, controlling means diagnostics. It means dynamic provisioning. It means in-call monitoring of your use case. And it could mean even pre-use case diagnostics in case there's an executive meeting that's using a VTC, and you want to know whether your conference call is going to work over a given network or not, or you have to reroute it, or it's self-reroute based on the network topology. So in a way, the way we look at it, and this is really where the compelling point is that the application is actually talking to the network. The significance of this is that in the past 20-plus years of my experience, and I'm not going to tell you the exact number of years so you don't guess my age, 30. I have focused personally, being a wireless guy, on the network talking to the application, meaning that the application has to be location aware and network aware. This is all good, but this was not successful. I mean, we've shipped many applications and software in Windows, for instance, that were basically network aware. So the application adapts to the network. What we discovered is that this is not sufficient. You really want to be able to provision the network to run the right application, because the application has to meet certain qualities, especially if you are an enterprise customer. You really, your voice, your video has to meet the bar. So you can't adapt to a network that's lousy and all of a sudden you back off on your data rate for the codec and you provide this awful voice and video. So the application talks to the network takes these settings and basically provisions the rest of the network. This is really, really significant. We are actually investing heavily into this technology. And we have pilot deployments and partners that are actually starting to deploy this technology. Nectar, for example, have agreement with Sonus, and Sonus is a choice of technology for one of the sources of technology for service providers, so that when they deploy the network for the customer, they have visibility to both the Lync deployment as well as the service provider deployment. Imagine now you have visibility end-to-end, not only on-prem, not only online, but everything in between because the service provider is installing the right controllers, the right software, so it can do this for you. This is really something that we encourage customers to ask for it and to deploy it. At a minimum, look at some case studies that we have put together, and we'll be really, really happy to answer any questions you have on this. It's a big deal for us. Monitoring the network and dynamic provisioning and this exchange between the applications and network is one thing that we have learned from customers, and we took it, fed it back to our product, worked with service providers, so on and so forth. The other one, which has been surfacing as extremely important for customers, and they've been, in a good way, hammering the service providers and Microsoft, is video interop, or interop in general. What are you guys doing about interop? We have a mixture of deployment. We have Cisco, we have Avaya, we have Lync, and these all endpoints, the VTCs have to talk to the Lync desktop, the Lync mobile has to be able to talk to a telepresence, so on and so forth. So we took this very seriously, and this program is actually, we have a whole dedicated team working on this. Part of the team is in mine, and of course, the development team as well is looking at this. So what we did is we have a short-term solution for this. And the short-term solution is, okay, we have a rich set of APIs that are public. And Mustafa, who asked the question back there, he's one of the guys that have worked on the server and on these APIs for 2013. And based on these APIs, we were able to address a good number of Fortune 500 interop between Cisco telepresence and between Lync deployment. So the very first thing, we want to use what we have so we can learn what else do we need to do. So based on this experience, and again, really we had some success stories. Some of the interop that we provided is limited. Some of it was fully functional in the sense of what the customer wanted. And the limited part is, for instance, things that have to do with content sharing and the performance of content sharing and so on and so forth. So what have we done? Yesterday, we also announced what we call the VIS, or the Video Interop Server. And that's a product that we will release with the next release of the server. I don't know if we've provided any dates for that. And the big elephant in the room for VIS actually is Cisco. So the fact that they have Cisco telepresence out there and we have Lync deployment, they want to talk to each other, the primary focus of VIS will be on that. There will be more for interop, and would be interesting to hear your perspective. Yes, please.
Is VIS a new server, or is it part of the edge server?
Mustafa, do you know? It's part of the edge server. Let me actually answer that. Functionally, it's a separate server. So we have spoken with partners who want to integrate it as part of another server, let's say an SBC or an SBA or so on and so forth. But for us, it's a separate server that's not part of the front-end server or not part of any other block that's part of our architecture. I don't know the answer to that. We can communicate on this because I really haven't reached that far on that. Yeah. William Looney is here. He's actually owns the product. So if you want offline, we can reach out to him and ask him that question.
And does it only go to Tamberg, or does it go to any Cisco?
So the primary focus is for Tamberg telepresence. But what we're trying to do, we're trying to add features based on customer feedback. And if you have a feedback for other functionality or features or endpoints that you like to see, we'll try our best to see how we can incorporate that in there. You have a question?
So, is your goal to have sort of like a published list that would,
yes, that will enable, right? There's a long-term solution that basically we're looking at, and what we're doing, we're accumulating all the feedback, whether it's Cisco Tamberg or Cisco something else or Polycom or Avaya or what have you, and basically integrate this into a future product. Okay, so this is all great. We're doing this between Microsoft and partners, service provider, customers, but also what we're doing, we actually have formed different industry alliances, because at the end of the day, we don't want to have every time there's a new product or new endpoint to go and do this individually one at a time. So just like we do things in the Wi-Fi Alliance, you have a Wi-Fi product, you go and certify it there. So this is for minimum interoperability. We're doing the same thing in a forum called OVCC, which stands for Open Visual Communication Consortium. And that consortium basically is service provider driven in the sense that the use cases that we address there are actually what service provider offers to their customers. It's focused on that, and we are very active in driving what are the minimum interop features for codec, for screen sharing, for audio, for IM and presence, and so on and so forth, security, multi-screens, and all those features that customers always look for. It's a long-term strategy, but at some point you have to start somewhere so that in a couple of years, for instance, when you have a new endpoint that comes in, you say, okay, are you OVCC certified if it's a service provider hosted, for instance? And if it's not, you push them in that direction, yes?
Is BIS specific to Lync Server 2015, or will it work with the mobile application?
It's not specific to 2013.
Or to whatever comes after 2015?
It's specific for the next release, yes.
Yeah, but
It's,
for the on-premise next version after.
it's for on-prem.
It's
Yeah.
not for mobile application.
That's exactly right. Right. No, it is for on-prem. That's good. Since if you don't mind me passing this along, because I really have to get rid of these to get a raise. So I have one more.
Can I say one thing, Amr, real quick? So I think the difference is, no, you don't have to give me a $10 card, but I think the difference is that with a hoster, it's going to go as a service, and that's something that can be looked at down the road. It's not what this is being deployed or being meant for. This is meant to be to work with existing video infrastructure that's on the on-prem side. So.
Whereas Lync Online is sold to larger enterprises.
Right.
Larger enterprises have other video conferencing
Yep.
things installed in the same.
Yeah, I think it's a logical direction for us to go. I'm just saying that the original focus is really the on-prem side. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the single most important thing at least for me, is that to understand use cases for video interop, because you'll be really amazed at the number of use cases and the differences between the use cases that different customers, enterprise and small businesses have for video interop. So if you have any feedback, I mean, it's priceless. I would love to hear it. Okay, we talked about the network diagnostics and provisioning. We talked about video interop as an ask. The thing that's surfacing, especially in the financial sector, banks and investment entities and so on and so forth, is that, okay, what are you guys doing about WebRTC? And then the most recently about those deployments that require contact centers, for example, where you really have a deployment and you have customers that want to talk to help desk and so on and so forth. So WebRTC spec does not exist yet. It really doesn't. I mean, it's in a big mess. What we're trying to do as Microsoft and teaming up with our partners is look at what features and functionalities that does WebRTC provide to the customers that we need to enable. And what we have done is we have formed this something called Orca Community Group in W3C. The Orca Community Group has all the major players that you can think about, at least most of them. We have built on the WebRTC framework in the IETF, which we are very active in. And we have selected the features and the APIs, the protocols, and so on and so forth that make sense for the customers. Based on that, we are building if you wish to call it WebRTC-ish solution, which is called Orca, ORCA. So ORCA, I believe, and this is not really, it's not on our product roadmap yet, but I believe is the WebRTC solution that will address the customer ask for a web solution as well as a mobile solution. I mean, WebRTC, people think it's only about the web, but actually most of the asks that we get from the financial sector is to enable use cases on the mobile devices. So we have a prototype for what is the current draft is like. Again, it's not supported. It's not on the product roadmap. However, this is a very intense activity within Microsoft. I can at least share with you that. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to align with the industry and align industry to satisfy customer needs. So this really, the next time we speak, you will find some very interesting news about this that will really make you jump up and down, hopefully, and make me get rid of this last. Okay, so another thing that we're doing with partners is to solve the UCC problem over Wi-Fi. Unified communication over Wi-Fi, it sucks. I mean, I don't care what people say. It really is an awful experience. The only reason we don't hear more about it because we are so used to Wi-Fi. We love it. I can move my laptop a little bit, maybe move into a different corner, maybe disable my video and something will work. So, and the reason for this is not only about bandwidth. So you can be connected to a Wi-Fi 11 AC, which is the most recent technology that Wi-Fi is certifying right now. It can give you a gigabit per second worth of a pipe. The problem is, for mobile devices, when you go from an AP to an AP, it keeps sticking to one AP, for example. It doesn't hand over to a better one. Or there's something called rate adaptation. It adapts the rates, and it collapses the rate to the lowest possible rate provided by the network. All these problems, when you add them up, it provides for this experience which is unacceptable. So we gathered about 20 companies, and we're putting together a program where if you want to be UCC certified, we call it actually Wi-Fi media, if you wish, Wi-Fi multimedia. If you want to be, let's say, UCC certified, whether it's Lync or something else, you have to take it to, let's say, a forum like Wi-Fi Alliance or Exia in Santa Clara, the entity we're working very closely with, and you have to go through certain test cases. And if you pass those test cases, you guarantee a minimum quality over these Wi-Fi networks. This is a pet peeve. I've been struggling with this even way before UCC became so popular. It's just that the quality of the drivers, the quality of the radio barely meets minimum interop, and they call it the day and they say, okay, this is it. And for internet access, it's fine, but for media, especially two-way real-time media, is totally unacceptable. So we're addressing these for different market segments. There's tons of material on this. Feel free to ping me on any of these if you wish. So with that, I conclude the presentation and would love to entertain any questions you may have. Yes?
I found it interesting, but I didn't really understand everything because I guess there was a lot of underlying complexities about what's going on with the software-defined network with the partners.
Yes. So what we're doing, here's the minimum part of this. Minimum meaning, like, let's say if this gets the message across. We have an API. It's called the Lync 2013 SDN API. What the API does, it communicates the quality of experience from the server to a software controller, so to an SDN controller. Take, for example, just to make this up a little bit, take an Aruba network, for example, Wi-Fi network. Aruba Wi-Fi network is implementing our SDN framework in there. It communicates the quality of experience with the SDN controller within the wireless switch of the Aruba network. So at first, like SDN 1.0, if you wish, it tells you at a minimum something went wrong with this call at this time over this link on this device. This is the first thing. The next level of detail, and right now we are on SDN 2.0, which we publicly posted with all sorts of use cases and so on and so forth. That allows you to do provisioning of the Lync client or the Lync server. And in this case, you have a dynamic provisioning of the network, in this case, the Wi-Fi network, to accommodate for better use of whatever resources they have. Now, the next, which we are actually working on right now with depth partners, service providers and partners together, is how do you dynamically provision during a call, which is the toughest problem. I'm on a video call with you, and things starting to go wrong. Do I wait for later and then diagnose the problem, or do I do anything about it right now? Because calls can last anywhere from 3 minutes to 2 hours, so it's eternity as far as media communication is concerned. So right now we're focusing on the Lync API and with the rich set of features that it communicates between the Lync server and a controller of some sort that sits on the network. That's really, and there's a lot more detail. Like you said, this is like, it's an ocean, and we have 4 or 5 sessions on that.
Yeah.
What is it going to be going over IP MPLS networks and those kinds of things too? With it?
Well, this is, yeah, eventually they will. And this is really where the partnership with the service providers comes in really handy. And so basically, instead of, I mean, it's a great add-on to have visibility to, let's say, on-prem network or anywhere between different islands. It's another thing to be able to have visibility on an MPLS network and all sorts of networks in between. And this is really our ultimate goal, is the end-to-end experience. The only way we can provide this is actually to team up with service provider, that part of it, because they own a good part of the network. And that's what we're doing. I hope that satisfies your answer, at least partially.
As much as you, because it's a lot to comprehend.
Yeah.
So I think I got the first cut view.
Yes. Do you have a question, please? Right.
So that API is isn't an API primarily intended for enterprise? I know that there's just been a handful of, or not even a handful, like 2 companies that are actively working with that API on the SDN side.
We have a handful. I think right now we are under NDA with some of those, but I think it's more than just soon to be more than a handful. But to your question on it's the service provider angle. The way we're addressing this is through partners. I mentioned Sonus, for example. So Sonus provides SPCs to service providers. Now, Sonus is working with us and with Nectar, who is a dev partner, on embedding this API in the SPC so that you can have communication with the server as well as with another SDN controller that the service provider may install on their network. So it's not, you don't only have one SDN controller. I think that's really what the key to this is. The question is, how do these controllers talk to each other to optimize the path of your media?
Who's the handful of partners you're working with?
The ones that we can share is basically HP, Nectar, and Aruba for different parts of the network. But there's, I'm not at liberty to share the other ones yet, but I would be glad to discuss this with you offline. And just, I know it's a side note, not exactly related to what your question, but it's worthwhile mentioning. So we have formed 2 industry groups that have, let's see, one of them has about 8 partners in the UCI forum, and another one on ONF probably has close to 20 partners. I cannot really remember. 20 companies, rather. So our hope is that our breadth program, based on this industry alliance work, will be inclusive of most of these partners.
UCI forum, what's the other one?
ONF. Yeah. Any other question? Anybody would like? First raise hands takes it. Okay. You have to ask a question now. That was a trick. All right. Well, thank you so much for your questions and your feedback. I really enjoyed the session. I hope you did. Thank you. Thanks, Clinton.